Unipil have asked me to say a few words about a video I did some time ago on how to read academic texts. But I thought I'd like to start off with saying a few words about the initial thoughts behind the video and the context of it. For some years now, myself, but also a number of my colleagues have experienced the effects and some challenges regarding the growing number of students. That we have a growing number of students and therefore also a number of students with very varied and different study skills and approaches to studying, and also I think more generally are changing the way that students approach text reading, particularly when they approach difficult texts. And I think the initial background of the video was that it is not my experience that this has something to do with students being less competent or motivated or engaged in studying. So I thought that the problem actually may lay somewhere else, namely in the fact that we as a university fail sometimes to make something explicit and address some issues that we take for granted, but that we should cease to take for granted because of changing times. And I think this applies to a number of issues, but one of them was how to address and read academic texts. So, I did a video. I think it was about, for a course with about 30-40 students, and frankly, what I was worried about and a bit nervous about was that they would find it trivial or even patronizing. But what happened was that in fact they were really appreciative of it, and a lot of students came up to me and said, "Wow, why didn't we get this when we started studying?" And it's been really helpful. And I thought this is kind of interesting and worthwhile thinking a little bit about, because it wasn't due to the fact that I made a brilliant video. I'm quite sure that it had something to do with us as a university failing to address very important issues that we need to help the students with. So I made this video, 30-40 students watched it, and now it's more than 1,000 views from students. So frankly, obviously, there's a lot of things that we can do to help the students out that they will appreciate. So, what was the video about? Firstly, I made very clear to explain why it is important to read texts. On Roskilde University, the whole foundation of the way we approach learning and studying is that we work in teams and groups and project work, but sometimes I think we fail to make explicit how the foundation of productive and creative project work and group work is the individual effort that goes into it, that we all make the individual effort and we bring that into the discussion and pooling our differences, so that by pooling our differences and bringing different readings and understandings to the table in the project and in the group, this is actually what spurs mutual discussions, elaborations and clarifications. Secondly, I said something about that reading text is not just reading text. There is a number of different kinds of text out there, and for each kind of text, each kind of genre, there's a different approach to or reading strategy that one should apply. And it's very important that we apply the right reading strategy for the kind of text that we are reading. A lot of students find academic texts really difficult and, frankly, quite boring. And even though this makes sense, we all know that academic texts are not boring. But of course, if we approach them, if we did not adjust our expectations and our reading strategy for the academic text, we will find them really difficult to read, hard work and boring. So we need to make clear that academic texts, they are not interesting because they're full of entertaining phrases and suspense. They're interesting exactly because there's something that is difficult within the text, and this is where the treasure lies, because what the academic text is about is challenging us in our understanding, our reflection of ourselves and the world. So it is what is difficult, it is what is challenging, that is where the treasure lies, that is where the excitement lies. Academic texts are meant to be interesting because they're meant to challenge us. But in order for them to do so and to succeed with this, we need to understand that reading academic text requires patience, requires hard work, and I would say also requires us that we take notes while reading. Patience because what is interesting lies within what is challenging. Hard work because reading academic text, you should rather read small passages slowly and thoroughly than a large passage or chunk of text in a fast forward mode. And you need to take notes for a number of reasons I will approach later on. Patience, that means when you're reading academic texts, don't rush. Make time and space for your reading. Better read small parts than large chunks. And always keep in mind that the mystery and the hidden treasures in the text lies in what is difficult, not in what is the opposite. Next, when you start reading a text, define the genre of the text and define the purpose of your reading before you start reading. The answers to these questions, the question to what is the genre and the question of why do I read the text, that defines your reading strategy. For example, is the text from a textbook? Then it's usually more descriptive, less analytical, and usually the chapters are quite separate, so you can read them separately. If you're reading an article, usually you need to read it more chronologically, and the text would be more discussing more. It would be more reflexive and more analytical. And if you're reading part of a book, you should remember you're reading a piece of a larger puzzle, so you're not getting the full picture. And this is very important to keep in mind. And next, always keep in mind, why are you reading the text? Is this an essential text? Is something that is a basic text in your project what you need? Then you really need to know it backward and forward. If you're just reading it out of interest, you can read it in a different way. So define the genre, define the purpose of your reading, and that defines your reading strategy. There's actually a number of things you can do before you start reading, and they are quite helpful and you should always apply them. First of all, skim the text. Look at the title and look at the subheadings and subtitles. It gives you an impression and some idea about the structure of the text and the structure of the argumentation of the text. Secondly, read the abstract. Is it actually relevant for you? Is the topic, is it dealing with the issues that you are looking for and you're interested in? And last but not least, look at the references. Usually you can find a lot of really valuable information and references about what theoretical knowledge and what questions that the author or the authors seem to work from. And sometimes this even answers some question that the text in itself does not answer, but because it's taken for granted. And next, always take notes. Notes are not, it's not something, you should not understand taking notes as something when first you read and then you take some notes to kind of capture your reading. Taking notes is part of reading. It is a part of reading academically. When you take notes, you are actually thinking about the text and making reflections about the text. Also, when you take notes, you force yourself to have a focus. You cannot take notes about everything. So you need to take notes. In order to take notes, you need to start off thinking about why am I reading this text, and it's very helpful. Secondly, taking notes supports your recall and understanding. Thirdly, it clarifies difficulties and questions that you have and unsolved puzzles in the text. Fourthly, and very important as well, once you have the notes, you have kind of a visualization of your thinking that you can bring to the table in the project work. And this also makes discussions in the groups much easier and more focused, because you have, each of you, a visualization of your different individual readings, but therefore also of the differences between your readings, and therefore of the pooling of your differences. That creates the good discussions. And last but not least, taking notes gets you started on writing. And this is often a huge challenge for students that read number of texts, but they haven't written a word, and then they have to start the project and they panic. Blank paper is difficult. If you have a lot of notes, you already started your process of reflection, process of writing, and it's quite helpful for the project work as well.